Hey there, listeners. This is your host, Trenz, signing in, and welcome to another episode of Trenz Podcast. For today's episode, I will be doing a book review of the 7th and 8th book of the James Bond series, or shall I say, Our Beloved Agent 007, written by author Ian Fleming. The titles of the books are Goldfinger and For Your Eyes Only. Also follow me on my social media accounts such as Instagram at TrenzYBA, Twitter at Trenz Ybañez, and on YouTube as Katrina Ybañez. Without further ado, let's begin the book review. And now before I actually read my own book review of Goldfinger, let's read what is written in the back of the book. Auric Goldfinger is the richest man in England. Though his wealth can't be found in banks, he's been hoarding vast stockpiles of his namesake metal, and it's attracted the suspicion of 007's superiors at MI6. Sent to investigate, Bond uncovers an ingenious gold smuggling scheme, as well as Goldfinger's most daring caper yet. Operation Grand Slam, a gold heist so audacious that it could bring down the world economy and put the fate of the West in the hands of Smersh. To stop Goldfinger, Bond will have to survive a showdown with the sinister millionaire's henchman, Oddjob, a tenacious karate master who will kill with one well-aimed toss of his razor-rimmed bowler hat. And now on to my book review of Goldfinger, by author Ian Fleming. Genre, fiction, mystery, and thriller. 264 pages. I started reading this book on October 31st, 2021, and finished reading this book on November 4, 2021. And I read it as an ebook format. I would definitely recommend reading this book for people who love thrilling stories about spies. This is the 7th book of the James Bond series. For me, this book is the most thrilling one that I have read so far. I could definitely imagine the story fan out like a movie. Goldfinger is a classic spy thriller featuring the dashing British gentleman spy James Bond, Agent 007. Bond works for the British Secret Service and is one of the elite 00 operatives with a license to kill. After breaking up a heroin smuggling ring, Bond crosses paths in Miami with a British millionaire, Auric Goldfinger, who is obsessed with gold and has hoarded away enormous quantities of it. Undercover, Bond eventually gets closer to Goldfinger and becomes part of his outrageous scheme to rob Fort Knox of his gold. Bond also learns that Goldfinger is a major financier of Smersh, the Soviet spy ring. With the help of the US Army, Bond foils Goldfinger's plans, but he escapes. Later, Goldfinger kidnaps Bond and steals an airplane, intending to turn Bond over to Smersh agents. Bond daringly forces the plane down over Canada, killing Goldfinger and most of his henchmen while surviving himself. And that's all for the first book. My own book review for Your Eyes Only by Ian Fleming, I will be reading this librarian's note. This entry relates to the collection of short stories under the title For Your Eyes Only. The individual stories can be found elsewhere. Now this sounds interesting. Bond watched her as she reached the edge of the tables and came up to the aisle. It was hopeless. She was coming to meet someone, her lover. She was the sort of woman who always belonged to somebody else. What damnable luck. Before Bond can pull himself together, the girl has come up to the table and sat down. "I'm sorry I'm late. We've got to get moving at once. You're wanted at the office," she added under her breath. Crash dive. Here we find sudden emergencies and beautiful girls who aren't quite what they seem. In the stock in trade of James Bond. When 007 is on the case, there's only one thing you can be sure of. The result will be thrilling. Whether he's dealing with the assassination of a Cuban thug in America, the destruction of an international heroin ring, or a sudden death in Seychelles, Bond gets the job done in his own suave and unmistakable style. The stories are From A View to Kill, For Your Eyes Only, Quantum Solace, Rosico, Hillbrand Rarity. Alright, now here is my book review for the second book for this episode. For Your Eyes Only by author Ian Fleming, a genre fiction thriller, number of pages 182. Started reading this on November 4, 2021 and finished reading this book on November 16, 2021. And it was an ebook format. I would definitely recommend reading this book as 4 different mini-adventures for Bond. This is the 8th book in the James Bond series. I only gave it a 4-star because I thought it was all one adventure story, and I got confused on how all the stories did not connect with each other. It was only in the 3rd mini-adventure that I realized that this book was separated into 4 mini-adventures. Overall, each story was great. James Bond, Agent 007 with Her Majesty's Secret Service, completes a series of adventures in this novel. First, Bond detects and defeats a spy ring operating out of an underground lair in France. Moving on to Canada, Bond tracks a Cuban murderer and wreaks revenge. Then, in the Bahamas, after swiftly stopping some Cuban rebels, Bond stays to learn a story of a former stewardess, now a wife of a millionaire. Next, Bond stops a heroin ring in Italy. And finally, Bond winds up in Seychelles Island off Africa, where he covers up the murder of an unpleasant, abusive man. As this novel begins, James Bond is returning from a failed mission. He is diverted from returning to England in order to investigate the killing of a NATO messenger in France. The local investigators resent his presence, and the investigation seems to go nowhere. Bond's keen insight leads him to suspect that a band of gypsies left behind a cell of spies, and he detects their underground lair. Bond is nearly killed in the process of capturing the spies, but he is saved by his current infatuation, fellow agent Mary Ann Russell. Then, the elderly English owners of a Jamaican estate are murdered by thugs who want their property. The two are old friends of M, and the Cuban gangster behind the slayings is out of reach of the law. M sends Bond to the gangster's estate in Canada to execute him. On the verge of finishing his task, Bond runs into the daughter of the murdered couple, also out for revenge. The two work together to destroy the gangster and his men. Bond's gold-trotting next brings him to the Bahamas, where he quickly puts Cuban smugglers out of commission. He spends an evening with the governor before he takes off again. The governor ends up telling Bond an interesting tale. A socially awkward young government worker meets a delicious stewardess on a flight back to England and marries her before heading to the new post in the Bahamas. The woman has an affair with a local playboy, and the man is devastated. His wife's affair breaks up, but he's too late. He divorces her, leaving her with no means of support. He begs for a little money, and he leaves her with a couple of items to sell. When she goes to sell them, though, she finds that he owes money on both. She is left devastated with nothing. The woman does, however, find a job in the hotel and eventually marries the Canadian millionaire. Bond's next mission is in Italy, where he is ordered to track down and stop a group of heroin smugglers running a pipeline of drugs into England. Bond meets with the American's underworld contact, who tells him a man named Columbo is running the drug ring. Bond, on Columbo's trail, is kidnapped by Columbo himself. However, Columbo tells a different story. The American contact is really the drug smuggler, backed by Russians. Colombo and Bond work together to kill the drug runner and break up the ring. Bond wraps up a routine piece of business in Seychelles Islands and then joins a sailing expedition with an unpleasant, abusive millionaire named Crest and his beautiful wife and a local man, Fiddle Barbie. On the voyage, Crest is murdered and Bond covers up the crime. And if you want to know how each of these short stories or mini adventure unfolds, read the book to find out, my dear listeners. Read the book to find out. Hey there, listeners. That's all for today's episode of Trenz Podcast. You can find Trenz Podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Don't forget to follow or subscribe and leave a comment. If you want to hear more book reviews and other topics, stay tuned for another episode of Trenz Podcast and keep on listening.